Look at your hands. Spread your fingers. Feel the temperature at the fingertips and then feel the temperature at the center of your palm. If it is evening and you are heading towards sleep, there is a difference. Your fingertips are slightly warmer than they were an hour ago. This is not a trivial detail. This is one of the earliest visible signs that a cascade has already begun inside your skull. A cascade you did not command, a cascade you cannot observe directly, but that is unfolding right now, whether you pay attention to it or not. In the next 60 minutes, if you allow them to proceed undisturbed, your brain will perform a sequence of construction tasks that it performs nowhere else in your 2-4 hour cycle. Hormones will shift, neural networks will reorganize, blood will redistribute, cells that have been working continuously for 16 hours will begin shutting down in a specific order, and at the end of the hour, your body will cross a threshold called the sleep gate, beyond which consciousness as you know it will dissolve into a different mode of existence for the next 7 or 8 hours. Most people treat the 60 minutes before bed as wasted time, time to be filled with television, with phones, with one more email, with the residual activity of a day that refuses to end. But the hour is not idle time. It is the most choreographed hour of your neural day, and what you do during it determines whether the construction proceeds cleanly or whether you spend the night fighting your own body for sleep it was trying to give you freely. You just felt something small register, reading that. A faint awareness that you might have been treating this hour carelessly. That awareness is the first correct response, and it will inform everything that follows. Let me walk you through what your brain does during those 60 minutes, because the sequence is specific and the specifics matter. Begin with a fact most people do not know. Your core body temperature has its own daily rhythm, a curve that peaks in late afternoon around 4 or 5 p.m. and begins descending as evening approaches. The descent is not accidental. Your hypothalamus, the small region at the base of your brain that regulates this rhythm, actively triggers heat loss in the evening by dilating the blood vessels in your hands, feet, and face. That is why your fingertips are warmer now. Heat is being released from your core through your extremities. Your core temperature is dropping, and the drop is the first and most reliable signal that the sleep cascade has begun. Kurt Kreutzsche and colleagues at the Psychiatric University Clinic in Basel studied this in detail across several papers in the late 1990s and early 2000s. They found that the magnitude of fingertip warming before sleep correlated with how quickly subjects fell asleep. People whose extremities warmed more readily fell asleep faster. People whose extremities stayed cool struggled. The thermoregulatory gate is real, and it is measurable, and it opens before any of the other sleep mechanisms engage. Everything else that follows depends on this temperature shift being allowed to happen. At roughly 60 minutes before your natural sleep onset, a second mechanism begins. Your pineal gland, a small pea-sized structure near the center of your brain, starts synthesizing melatonin. Not a trickle at first, a slow ramp. Melatonin is not sleep itself. It is more like a signaling molecule that says to every system in your body, it is time to begin preparing. Blood vessels dilate further. Gut motility slows. Kidney function shifts toward concentrating urine rather than producing it rapidly. Immune activity rises, because sleep is when the immune system does much of its coordinated work. Melatonin does not knock you out. It tells every other system that the body is authorized to start changing modes. Here is the part most people do not understand. Melatonin release is extraordinarily sensitive to light, not all light. Specifically, the short wavelength blue portion of the spectrum, the wavelengths most strongly emitted by screens, by LED bulbs, by phone displays. The retina contains specialized cells called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, discovered only in the early 2000s, that do not contribute to vision at all. Their only job is to measure ambient blue light and report it to a master clock region of your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. When those cells detect blue light, the master clock tells the pineal gland to suppress melatonin production. Charles Czeisler at Harvard Medical School has demonstrated, across more than 2 decades of research, that exposure to normal room lighting during the wind-down window delays melatonin onset by roughly 90 minutes in most adults and suppresses total nighttime melatonin by about 50%. Screen exposure produces a similar, sometimes larger, effect. What this means in practical terms is that if you sit in a brightly lit kitchen or stare at your phone during the final hour of your day, you are not neutrally waiting for sleep to arrive. You are actively instructing your brain that daylight is still present, and your brain is responding by canceling the melatonin signal that would have organized your night. The gap between what your body wants to do and what your light environment is telling it to do is the source of most modern sleep problems. Not stress, not age, not a disorder. A simple mismatch between the biology and the signals it is receiving. At roughly 45 minutes before sleep, a third shift begins. Your brain's electrical activity changes in a specific way. The fast, high-frequency beta waves that dominated during alert thinking begin to give way to slower alpha waves. Alpha activity is associated with relaxed wakefulness. It is the state of reading a novel calmly, of watching a fire, of letting thoughts drift without actively directing them. This is not yet sleep. This is the transition state, a specific neural mode that has to be passed through before sleep is possible. If you remain in active beta, focused attention, problem solving, emotional engagement, your brain cannot transition through alpha. The gate cannot open because you are standing in front of it. This is why the advice to calm down before bed is not vague wellness guidance. It is specific neuroscience. The neural state you need to reach in the 30 minutes before sleep is architecturally different from the state you were in at 3 p.m., and getting there requires cooperation, not force. Picture the transition as a dimmer switch rather than an on-off button. Your brain does not flip from awake to asleep. It slides through a sequence of states, each one biologically prepared by the previous one. Interrupt the sequence at any point, and the whole construction stalls. You lie in bed with a body that is physically ready to sleep and a brain that is still stuck in beta, running through tomorrow's tasks, replaying today's conversations, generating the insomnia that almost every adult over 50 reports experiencing at some point. At roughly 30 minutes before sleep, a fourth system activates. The glymphatic network, a waste clearance system in your brain that was only formally described in 2012 by Mike and Nedergaard and colleagues at the University of Rochester, begins ramping up its activity. The glymphatic system is essentially the brain's cleaning crew. During the day, it works at low capacity. During sleep, particularly during deep, slow-wave sleep, it works at full capacity, flushing metabolic waste, including proteins associated with neurodegenerative disease, out of the brain through specialized channels. The pre-sleep window is when this system prepares to engage. Cerebrospinal fluid flow begins to increase. The spaces between brain cells widen slightly, creating more room for fluid to move through. This is not something you feel directly, but it is happening whether you notice or not, and it is one reason the quality of those 60 minutes affects the quality of your cognitive function the next day. The glymphatic system does its real work during sleep itself, but its preparation begins in the hour before. Consider what this implies. If you sleep poorly, your brain fails to clear its metabolic waste fully. The waste accumulates. Over years, the accumulation may contribute to the slow cognitive changes that many older adults experience. Note the word may. The glymphatic research is compelling, but causally linking sleep quality to neurodegenerative disease in humans remains difficult. What is established is that the system exists. What is established is that it works better during sleep than during wake. What is not yet established, to the degree nutrition research or cardiovascular research is established, is exactly how much a single poor night or a single well-protected pre-sleep hour shifts long-term outcomes. The viewer should hold this at the appropriate weight, which is high enough to take seriously, not so high as to claim certainty the data does not yet provide. At roughly 15 minutes before sleep, a fifth shift happens, and this one is emotional rather than strictly mechanical. Your brain's default mode network, the network that generates self-referential thought, mind-wandering, planning, and rumination, begins to decouple from its daytime pattern. The prefrontal cortex, which has been exerting top-down control over your attention all day, begins to reduce its activity. The amygdala and other emotional processing regions remain active, but their connection to prefrontal regulation shifts. This is the moment when unprocessed emotions often surface. The worry that you successfully suppressed during the day arrives in bed. The grief you have been avoiding pushes into consciousness. The small conflict you did not resolve replays itself. This is not a malfunction. This is your brain doing what it is supposed to do, which is processing material it did not have bandwidth to process during active hours. The problem is not that the emotions arrive. The problem is that most people interpret their arrival as a failure, lay a secondary anxiety on top of them, and prevent the brain from doing the processing work that sleep was going to complete. If you allow the emotional surfacing to happen without fighting it, without reaching for a phone to distract yourself, without generating a second layer of worry about why you cannot stop thinking, the processing runs its course. REM sleep, which follows later in the night, will integrate what surfaced. By morning, the weight of the material is often reduced, not because you solved anything, but because the brain did its work while you slept. This is one of the quiet functions of sleep that people rarely appreciate. The brain is not just resting, it is digesting. There is a sixth element worth mentioning, because it sits in a different category of evidence than the five I have described. The idea that the last hour before bed has a particular role in memory consolidation, specifically in preparing material for processing during the night that follows, has emerged from research in the past decade. Robert Stickgold at Harvard and others have shown that what you experience in the final waking minutes may be preferentially consolidated during subsequent sleep, possibly because the brain tags recent material as high priority for overnight processing. This may mean that doom-scrolling news or watching distressing content in the last hour is not simply poor sleep hygiene. It may be actively loading the consolidation queue with the material most likely to be replayed in your dreams and integrated into long-term memory. I want to mark the word may here carefully, because the consolidation priority hypothesis is plausible but not yet fully established. Some findings support it, others are more equivocal. What seems likely, based on the current evidence, is that the final minutes of waking do hold a privileged position in what gets processed overnight, though exactly how strong that privilege is remains debated. Even at the weaker end of the plausible range, the practical implication is the same. Choose carefully what you feed the brain in its last hour, because whatever you feed it, the brain may work with overnight. At the end of the hour, if the cascade has been allowed to complete, you cross the sleep gate. Core temperature has dropped roughly 1 degree Fahrenheit. Melatonin is flowing freely. Brain waves have transitioned from beta through alpha into theta, the earliest stages of sleep. The glymphatic system is ready to engage. The default mode network has relaxed its grip. Sleep onset arrives, usually within a few minutes of lying down in darkness. If the cascade has been disrupted, you lie awake. You know the feeling. The body is heavy, but the mind is still running. The room is dark, but the retina still carries an afterimage of the screen you looked at. The emotions are present, but you are fighting them. None of these is failure. Each one is a specific mechanism being interrupted by specific causes, and each one can be addressed by respecting what the brain was trying to do during the hour you did not know was so carefully choreographed. Consider the person over 55 whose sleep has declined steadily for a decade. The story they tell themselves is that they are getting older, that sleep simply gets worse with age, that there is nothing to be done. Part of this is true. Deep sleep does decline with age. REM architecture shifts. But much of what people attribute to aging is not aging at all. It is 20 or 30 years of habits that disrupted the pre-sleep cascade, accumulated night after night, producing a progressively worse relationship with sleep that feels like decline and is actually just the result of how the hour before bed has been spent. If you are over 50 and you do 3 things differently in the last hour before sleep, the changes compound quickly, within 2 to 3 weeks in most cases. First, dim the lights. Actually dim them, not lower by 1 notch. Cut the light output by at least half, ideally more. Use lamps instead of overhead lighting. Consider bulbs specifically designed for evening use, which emit reduced blue wavelengths. The goal is to signal to your intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells that the environment has shifted toward dusk. Your biology is waiting for this signal. Provide it. Second, stop screens 30 to 60 minutes before bed. This is the advice everyone has heard and almost nobody follows because the phone is the most consistently available companion in the modern evening. The melatonin suppression from screen use is not subtle. It is measurable in a blood test. If you cannot eliminate screens entirely, at minimum use the warm color temperature settings most devices now offer. The difference is meaningful, though not as large as simply putting the device away. Third, give the emotional processing space to happen. This one is harder to describe because it is more subjective, but the principle is specific. Do not fill the last hour with distraction. Allow yourself to feel what surfaces. Sit with a cup of decaf tea, read a physical book, listen to music without lyrics, have a quiet conversation, let the day end. The default mode network is trying to integrate what you experienced, Help it. Notice that none of this requires adding something to your life. It requires subtracting, less light, fewer screens, less active thinking. Less effort to extend the day into territory where biology was asking for a softer transition. In the first few nights of respecting the pre-sleep hour, you may notice little change. Habits resist. The body takes time to recalibrate to signals it has been receiving in distorted form for years. By day 7 to 10, most people report falling asleep faster, not dramatically, 5 or 10 minutes. But that margin is real, and it represents the difference between a sleep gate that opens cleanly and one that has to be forced through resistance. By week 3, some people notice something unexpected. They begin to look forward to the evening wind down rather than dreading it. The hour becomes pleasant, calm, occasionally the most enjoyable hour of the day. It was always capable of being that. The biology was designed for it. The modern environment simply overwrote the default. Picture your hands again, the way you did at the start. Spread your fingers. If you do this exercise an hour before sleep tonight, in dim light, with your phone in another room, and you pay attention to the small shift in temperature that will happen across the 60 minutes, you will be observing the first visible sign of a cascade that medicine took a century to document and that your body has been running faithfully every night of your life. The warmth in your fingertips is the opening note. The temperature drop is the first movement. The melatonin ramp, the alpha waves, the glymphatic preparation, the default mode relaxation, these are the subsequent movements. The sleep gate is the final cadence. Pay attention to any single note, and the rest become audible. The hour was never empty. It was being built every night by the most intricate organ in your body, patiently waiting for you to stop interrupting the construction. Look at your hands, feel the temperature. The hour is starting.